I've been in phases in my life where I have felt the volume of the voices in my head relating to sex and lust has been higher at times, and it has lowered at times. I have found myself in great periods of absolute peace, and I have found myself in other periods where I was uncomfortable with myself and with the feelings that were coming up. What I'm interested in is the management of the emotion and the energy in the body and the thinking that goes along with sex and sexuality. And I want it to be connected to the energy of love. In yogic terminology, we would say, I'm connecting the second energy center, which is in your pelvis. It's your sexual energy. I'm connecting that second energy center with the fourth energy center, which is your heart. Sexual energy, creativity, and the heart center where our love is and our relationship is. In our society today, we live to a great extent imbalanced in our second energy center. And so much of our acting out around sex is coming in a disconnected way. To reconnect the second energy center with the fourth energy center is to bring our sexual energy into the realm of love, connection, healing, and balance.
My inquiry is about, so I've had a few things where I feel that maybe there have been some addictions in my life. So when it comes to food and relationships. Now, I have a few questions about sex addiction and how that shows up in comparison to, say, a woman of a certain age and biology and hormones and all the other things that women have to deal with. You know, at what point does it become an addiction? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I want to ask just a few questions. So this is an inquiry about principally about sex addiction and that particular element, or did you want to cover food as well, codependency?
We could talk about that, but I think, the sex addiction was the
very good. Very good. And you related that in your inquiry, you related that to age and hormonal levels. Can you just expand upon that just so I make sure that I want to address where you're coming from and what you're thinking about?
Okay. So like I'm age 42 myself, and I feel like that as a female, we hit a peak of hormone activity and desires, I suppose.
Yes.
So how do you distinguish between an addiction and something that's healthy and normal and
beautiful. Oh gosh, I love this so much. I'm so grateful to you to ask this question. It's such an important inquiry. Let me explore a little bit, and then we'll come back and we'll talk again. Okay. Okay. Gorgeous. Sex addiction and the line between desire, healthy desire, and when might that go over the edge into addictive patterns or addictive impulses. So what an important topic. I want to come at this and I want to set a few ground rules of understanding because we're coming into one of those topics like religion and politics where everybody has an opinion. And because sex is such a powerful impulse in our life, perhaps the most powerful thing that we experience for many people in their entire life, the sexual experience, for many people, the most powerful thing, most powerful energy that they experience. So when we're in the realm of something so ballistic, so powerful, we want to, we want to set a few ground rules, I think is important. So I'll use Rumi's poem. Rumi said, "Out beyond ideas of right doing and wrong doing, there is a field, and I'll meet you there. So right now, I want us all to step collectively into the field where there's no right and there's no wrong. And we're not coming from a moral place. We're coming to explore one of the most important topics of our human experience, which is our sexual life. And wow, you're so brave, and it's really the final frontier. Because I can say to you, sex addiction, it's a crowd favorite, and everybody laughs. And I can say to you, sex addiction, it's the final frontier. It's the last thing that anybody really wants to talk about, because there is so much shame and guilt that we carry when it comes to this aspect of our life. So thank you for your courage and your strength, so that we can, as a community, we can take a look at this topic and we can explore together. So we're out in the field. There's no right doing and there's no wrong doing, and we're in an exploration. Okay. First of all, I'm coming from a male perspective, right? I'm in this body, and I'm 57. Also, that is an influence on my perspective on these things. I have looked at this issue with great interest and great consciousness, sometimes a lack of consciousness and sometimes more consciousness throughout my life. So we all have to understand that I have all the limitations that any of us have. I'm just laying out my limitations in perspective. I'm trying to see beyond myself. What I see is that the sexual act and the desire to have sex is extremely normal. I have seen people express themselves sexually in all manner of ways, whether that was directly in my life with partners, or if that was hearing from friends of mine, or sharing about this openly in circles where we spoke about sex and sensuality and all of these things. So I understand that the human experience around sex takes infinite forms. We also have ancient texts that devoted themselves to sex and the potential of sex and sexuality to be a method of reaching God and of communing with God. So we have everything from the most sacred approaches to sex to the most profane, and we have everything in between. And so we have to understand that we human beings are amazingly creative, and that's a part of what we have to understand when we approach this topic. As a 42-year-old woman, and coming to a peak of your sexual desire and your power, I say to you, congratulations, you're alive. How wonderful. And it's not so much a question of, is this right? Is this wrong? It's a question of, wow, this is a lot of energy. How do I manage it? And this is so much a part of our journey on the path of discovery. How can I manage my energy? And it's been the topic of a yogic pursuit for thousands of years. So much so that the ancient texts talk about it. And they suggest everything from celibacy all the way to moderation, all the way to indulging. Again, there's no right or wrong way. Where behavior becomes addiction, any behavior, has to do with the energy behind it. Sometimes it's hard to catch. It's like, whoa, I have these big desires. Is this addictive? Whoa, I find myself engaging or acting upon these desires. Is this addictive? Now that's a question, an inquiry for each individual. And the way that I'm able to discern, and that's the key word, discernment, the way that I'm able to discern where an impulse is addictive or not, one of the clues for me is, how do I feel after engaging in a behavior? So, for example, once upon a time when I was smoking pot at the very beginning of my cannabis use, I felt like it was in alignment. It gave me something at the time that I needed. And it didn't leave me with any kind of emotional hangover. I enjoyed it. Of course, I would become dependent upon it, and it created a lot of problems in my life. And later on, I would reflect that when I smoked pot, it created this very painful thought process for me afterward. There's something here that's out of alignment for me. And it wasn't related to what somebody else said, someone else's opinion. This was me now. I actually felt in my own heart, I want to stop doing this behavior, but I can't. And so when I engaged and indulged in the behavior, it felt for me out of alignment. Again, not because it was right or wrong, but really my own heart saying, like, Tommy, I think there's something for you beyond this behavior. Now, cannabis and sex are two very, very different categories. I believe the sexual act is a part of life. You could say, well, you don't need it to survive, but it's a part of life, and it's a beautiful part of life. And while it may not be a survival need, it is a part of the enjoyment and the way of expressing ourselves. And on the spiritual tip, it really is a way to connect very deeply with yourself, another human being, and God and spirit. So from this perspective, we ask ourselves, what am I feeling? What are my thoughts around these desires? Do I have guilt? If so, why? Is it related to something in my own heart? Or do I have guilt because somebody else planted a seed in me that said, if ever I behave this way or have these feelings, there's something wrong with that? Many parents have done that inadvertently or purposefully to their kids to try to have them control their sexual impulses. And so that later on in life, when sexual impulses arose, those children who were now adults felt guilty. They felt like there was something wrong. But remember, we're in the field right now between right and wrong, out beyond right and wrongdoing. So we first have to understand, what is ours? What is the voice within me? What's real for me? If I feel guilt, it's important that I look at it. Is that guilt there because I'm out of alignment with myself? Or is it a misguided guilt that's coming from some external force where I need to cut the ties and change the script of those old programs that are making me feel guilty, but not authentically my programs? This is an opportunity when we feel guilty to come into greater contact with what is authentic and what is real for us. Is there shame there? Shame is quite another thing. Shame is, I'm bad. Guilt is, I did something bad. Shame is, I am bad. I am wrong. I don't belong. There's something broken about me. Well, no, there's nothing broken about anybody for having sexual impulses, even if those impulses are imbalanced. There's energy to be managed there. There's something to be looked at here. Now, we're not talking about violence, and we're not talking about things that can be so imbalanced that they hurt you or other people. We're not in that realm right now of this discussion. We're talking about, there's a lot of energy arising for me at this point in my life, and I'm trying to discern, is this addictive or not? For me, personally, that energy can be addictive, but it isn't necessarily. And I've been in phases in my life, both in active addiction, like drug addiction, and in recovery, where I have felt the volume of the voices in my head relating to sex and lust, the volume has been higher at times, and it has lowered at times. I have found myself in great periods of absolute peace, and I have found myself in other periods where I was uncomfortable with myself and with the feelings that were coming up. It's all absolutely normal. It's an investigation, and there's no shame around any of this. So important that people understand that. So what I'm interested in is the management of the energy, meaning the emotion and the energy in the body and the thinking that goes along with sex and sexuality. And I want it to be connected to the energy of love. I want it to be connected to love. I want to move into a loving place with it. And what that means is, in yogic terminology, we would say, I'm connecting the second energy center, which is in your pelvis. It's your energy, it's your sexual energy, and it's your genitals. I'm connecting that second energy center with the fourth energy center, which is your heart. So we're making that energetic connection between second energy center, sexual energy, creativity, and the heart center where our love is and our relationship is. In our society today, we live to a great extent imbalanced in our second energy center. This is the center of our sexual energy. And so much of our acting out around sex is coming in a disconnected way from that center, disconnected from love. To reconnect that energy with the energy of love is one of the most powerful things that we can do on the path of recovery. To reconnect the second energy center with the fourth energy center is to bring our sexual energy into the realm of love, connection, healing, and balance. And that work, while easier said than done, anybody can do it if they desire to do it. And then your expression sexually is filled not with guilt, not with shame, but with love. And I mean that whether you express sexually towards yourself, towards another. And bringing love into the realm of sex, some people feel, oh, how unexciting. I prefer a lustful approach to sex. And what I would say to that is, that's what you're attuned to. That's what you've been trained into. That's your training, is to treat the sexual act as a lustful act. And you can stay in those patterns for a lifetime and never transcend those patterns. And this is where I believe we get into addictive patterns with sex. Addictive meaning disconnected. The opposite of yoga, the opposite of a union, the distance from love. This is where those very natural, beautiful, incredible, I'm so alive and I'm so turned on sexually, those impulses, disconnected from the heart, disconnected from spirit, moves us into an addictive realm with these things. It moves out of the heart and it moves right up into the head. This is one of the reasons why pornography is so dangerous for people, because it so overwhelms the mind. It becomes a very mental experience. Yes, of course, you're being turned on by those images, but you're being trained into and attuned to those images. And again, we're out in the field beyond right and wrong. I'm not even judging pornography in any way, shape, or form. I'm saying what I've noticed is it creates an imbalance for many people. And in that imbalance, it's difficult to reconnect with the love of the thing. So I remember having a conversation about, and this was a very open conversation about masturbation and sex and sexuality with my sponsor. And I was in early recovery and I was having a lot of massive feelings around this, very difficult for me to manage. And my sponsor said one of the wisest things I've ever heard. He said, well, whatever you do, Tommy, make sure to bring God with you. And I tell you, that was a game-changing thought, that it immediately broke through any layer of shame I had around sex and sexuality. And it put me in a state of, even here in my sexual life, God wants to be here. God wants to be here with me. There's no shame. There's no hiding. There's no need to hide. And it's funny, when I move beyond a guilt or a shame cycle, I come into this embodied place. And when I intentionally use the words, Tommy, connect your sexual energy with your heart, somehow there's a terrible pressure that all of a sudden is gone. Think how many people in the history of humanity have struggled around this very thing. People telling other people how shameful they are. Nobody guiding anybody to find union, to find connection, to find, all about this religious, just religious nonsense, and creating shame around sex and sexuality. Totally misguided. Oh my God. I mean, it's so painful for so many people, and it's been painful for me in my life. As I've had to muddle through very confusing waters and having grown up with very misguided ideas around sex and sexuality, and coming into a much more loving place now. And here you, this incredibly brave woman, you come today with this inquiry, and we get to explore this together, all of us, so important. So the energy, the thought process of addiction for me is there's a clinging, there's an attachment, there's an obsession, there's an obsessiveness. And when I feel that come up for me, I need to come back into a more meditative way of being for me. It's not appropriate for me to act upon those kinds of things out in the world. I'm married to somebody, and I want to be married to someone. That's my choice. And so that means that we're in a collaboration together, my wife and I, and we work together in this way to understand. And by the way, we are growing older, and our hormones and our needs are changing all the time. And our needs may not change at exactly the same time. And that can bring up challenges between couples, right? So there's so many ways to look at the unfolding of human experience. Now there's a lot more to cover. I just want to keep going a few more minutes here, because when we look at the management of energy, the ways that we can do it are very clear, actually. If you want to manage sexual energy, anybody, if you want to manage it without releasing it in a sexual act, and you want to, work on transmuting that energy, then the processes of breath work and meditation, particularly Kriya, learning the locks in the body, these will help you or anybody to draw that energy up from second energy center up into the navel center, up into the heart center, up into the throat, and then ultimately up into the higher energy centers, and bringing that to a state of union. I'm working on this, where you can create that internal sense of presence and joy. It's sort of a spiritual version, if you will, of the sexual act. It's the transmutation of sexual energy into a higher energy. And while that may, so many people in our society today will laugh at me in my face for even suggesting that, because they're so attuned to want to have an immediate sexual expression for their lust and are addicted to that release over and over and over again. And I understand it. I have no judgment of it whatsoever. I've been there. I've so been there. But I don't desire to be in that place anymore because it doesn't serve me ultimately. So I'm into learning about the transmutation of energy. And I learned that as a yogi. And I learned that from the teachers and the teachings that have come before me, and many, many, many personal experiences through yoga, which show me, oh, Tommy, you can do it. You can do it. Wow, you can raise that energy and you can come to an incredible presence. The expression sexually is a release of energy, a powerful release of energy. To transmute the energy is to draw the energy inward and to use it. It's a very strengthening, and you might call it kind of a fountain of youth in a way. So not always release that energy, but to hold that energy inward and to transmute that energy is an incredibly, incredibly powerful elixir for the human being, for men and women. So that's on the transmutation side of it. On the expression sexually, we all have free will. We have the ability to express ourselves, to connect with people, whether you're doing that on an individual basis with one partner and exploring a romantic sexual relationship, or you have multiple partners, or if you're exploring the sexual relationship with yourself. There's no right or wrong to any of it as long as there's honesty and integrity, and that nobody is getting hurt, and that everybody is in this open and very honest exploration. There just isn't a right and a wrong, and it really depends upon you. But the question that you're asking isn't necessarily about what you're doing, but whether what you're doing or what you desire to do or the thought process, is this addictive in nature? And the answer to that really has to do with your thought process before, during, and after. The way that you feel in your emotional body. The sexual act should leave a person feeling uplifted, not depleted. And when it's connected, that's usually the result. So we only need to really regard our own experience. If I can't stop thinking about sex, and I have to continually, from a place of need and a place of imbalance, relieve myself of that urge, then I know for myself, I know what that is. I've been there with drugs. I've been there with alcohol. I've been there in relationships. And when I feel that energy, I'm very clear on what that is. And when I engage in an act that's driven by an addictive energy, it leaves me feeling empty or guilty or shamed. It leaves me vacuous. Rather than feeling uplifted and connected to the joy of living and getting to share this energy with another human being, I feel let down. And that's when I have to catch it and say, no, Tommy, don't go after it again. Rather, recognize there's something out of alignment here. And it needs to be addressed. So critically important. Otherwise, I'll stay on the cycle. I feel let down. So guess what I do? Try it again. Do it again. Get the high of the sexual act and treat it like a drug. Talk about painful. Last thing I want to say on this topic is not necessarily for you, but it's for people out in the world who are experiencing sex addiction, for whom the thing that I'm describing is a problem for them, and they recognize it today, and they don't know that there's a way through it. There is a way through it. There's absolutely a way to recover from this, just like you can recover from any addiction. And it has to do with reconnecting with your heart and with yourself. And We live in an age right now where if you are a sex addict and you're pursuing the release, that sexual release over and over again, and it's feeling empty and empty and empty, you're getting the high, you're treating sex like a drug, like a high, and then you feel the come down afterward, very unpleasant. Well, you live in a world right now where there's literally your drug dealer of sex is literally right here all the time in your device. You can never get away. And so there's nowhere in the world you can go where you could get away from the temptation if you're in that frequency of sexual addiction. So I just wanted to say that for the people out there who know what I'm talking about and who identify with this and who need help. There's no shame in this. There's no shame in this. It's just an imbalance, and we need to learn how to reconnect. We need to learn how to move energy around the body. Once again, I'm crying from the rooftops, screaming from the rooftops. Please take on a yogic practice. The user manual for this, for operating this body, this machinery that we all get to use. Last thing, I'm sorry, there's so much. Last thing. It is wonderful to be alive. It is wonderful to be thrilled and awed by the sexual experience. It's just such a wonderful thing. It's one of the wonderful things that we get to experience, and you really should not feel guilty about it. And to be vibrant and alive, there's biological reasons for that. There are probably some emotional reasons for that. But it's just really a wonderful part about being alive. I am somebody who is, I guess you would refer to me as sex positive, in the sense that I'm all for it. It's an aspect of our existence, and how wonderful that we get to experience and to rejoice in that energy. And your inquiry about knowing when it's joyful and when it might be moving into compulsive or addictive, I cannot think of anything, honestly, today more important than this. How many people in our society, especially men, but not just men, but especially men, struggle here and fall from grace. In our papers this morning, very famous people in Los Angeles just crushed behind this very inquiry. People having to go to jail, people having to, all of it. Just, this is how serious and how big a problem this can become for people. So thank you for bringing your courage and your vulnerability to the table. And I would like to hear from you again, Denise, and let me know what's come up for you as we've explored this.
Thank you, Tommy. I didn't really go into too much detail, but you've answered a lot of my questions that I had in my head. I'm feeling very comforted by what you've said. So thank you very much. Yeah, that all made total sense to me. So thank you very much.
Okay. You're so welcome. As I'm listening, there's one more thing I wanted to say for parents, because it's such an important topic. At an appropriate age, mainly in teenage years, and as children are coming into puberty, I think it's critically important for parents to have open, non-shaming, supportive, loving conversations about sex and sexuality with their kids. I think it's so important that parents speak openly and honestly about this, that parents talk directly to their children, boys and girls, mothers and fathers, and have this conversation. So this doesn't go into that realm of shame for those kids, and it doesn't go into that realm of guilt, that children understand this is a big energy and it's part of the joy of being alive, and it's an energy that needs to be managed, and that there are techniques for managing it and for using it in the best way possible. So thank you, Denise, so much.